The package arrived on Father's Day morning. No sender, no note. Just a brown box sitting neatly on the porch steps. Thomas Margaret's voice came from the kitchen, soft but cautious. "What's that?" He squinted at the label. No return address. Priority overnight. Probably Claire, he thought. A peace offering, maybe. It had been 6 days since their last fight, the one where she'd screamed, "I need the money while you're alive, not when you're gone." He carried the box inside the cardboard, still cool from the morning air. Margaret met him halfway, drying her hands on a towel. "Don't open it," she said suddenly. Thomas frowned. "What? Why not?" She pointed to the corner seam. "Look closer. Tiny punctures, dozens of them, the kind you make when something inside needs to breathe." "Tom," she whispered, "can't you see?" He froze. A faint rustle came from inside, followed by a soft hiss, like air escaping a valve or something alive testing its cage. Thomas took a step back. The coffee in his cup trembled. What the hell is this? Margaret's hand found his arm trembling. "Call someone. Now!" 10 minutes later, flashing blue lights painted their living room walls. Officer Cruz stepped through the doorway, calm but alert. "Sir, ma'am, where's the box?" Thomas pointed to the coffee table. It sat there, innocent and still. Only then did he realize this wasn't a gift. It was a message. For Father's Day, he whispered, his throat tight. "My daughter sent me this." Before we continue, subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. The truth inside that box will make you question what love really means. 6 days earlier, their house on Willowbrook Street didn't sound like home. It sounded like a war zone. The argument started over breakfast. It always did. Margaret was washing dishes. Thomas reading the mail when Claire barged in without knocking. Her perfume hit the room before her voice did. "Dad, we need to talk." Thomas didn't look up. "If this is about money again," "It's always about money," Claire snapped, "because you have it and I don't." Brian followed behind her, hands stuffed in his pockets, pretending to be calm. He always played the quiet one until it was time to make a demand. "Come on, Tom, it's not a big deal. Just a short loan." A loan. Thomas lowered his glasses. "Last month it was for rent. Before that, your car. Before that, a gambling debt you swore didn't exist. What kind of loan never gets repaid?" Claire slammed her phone on the table. "You think I enjoy asking you? You think I want to beg my own father?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then stop doing it." The sound of Margaret's dish breaking in the sink cut through the tension like glass on metal. "Please," she whispered, "let's not do this again." But it was already too late. Claire's eyes glistened with anger. "You're sitting on hundreds of thousands while your daughter's drowning in bills. You're hoarding it like some kind of miser." Thomas rose slowly, the stiffness in his knees making every inch feel deliberate. "I worked 43 years for that money. 12-hour shifts, no vacations, missed birthdays. You had everything I didn't. A car at 16. Private college, your wedding paid in full. You think that just fell from the sky?" Brian smirked. "It's not like you can take it with you, old man." The words hit harder than they sounded. Old man. Not Dad, not Mr. Reed, just old man. Margaret turned, eyes pleading. "Claire, please, you're crossing a line." But her daughter wasn't listening. "I need help, Mom. We're behind on rent. Ethan's school fees are due. Lily's winter clothes." Thomas cut in sharply. "Don't you dare drag the kids into this." Claire's lips trembled, but not from guilt. "You know what? Forget it." She grabbed her phone, her voice shaking with venom. "When you're old and sick, when you need someone to take care of you, remember this moment." She stormed out. Brian trailing behind her, but not before muttering, "Family doesn't abandon family." The door slammed so hard it rattled the picture frames on the wall. Silence filled the room. Thomas stood there, gripping the back of his chair, feeling the tremor in his own hands. The inheritance documents spread across the table like shrapnel, looked absurd now, meaningless compared to the echo of his daughter's words. Margaret spoke softly, almost to herself. She's not herself lately." "She's exactly herself," Thomas said bitterly. "We just refuse to see it." He sank back into the chair, staring at the coffee stains spreading across the rug. 43 years of saving, of careful planning, reduced to a war over money. On the mantel, the family photo face down. Maybe it had fallen during the shouting. Maybe someone turned it on purpose. That night, neither of them spoke during dinner. The clinking of cutlery replaced conversation. Margaret tried once to break the silence. "She's struggling, Tom. You know that." He looked at her eyes hollow. "Struggling. She married a man who hasn't worked in 3 years. She gambles online. She lies about bills, maxes out cards, then calls it love when she needs something." Margaret's eyes filled. "She's still our daughter." Thomas's voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like she's my creditor?" The following days passed in tense quiet. Margaret went about chores with mechanical rhythm. Thomas spent long hours in his garage fixing things that didn't need fixing: an old lawnmower, a broken lamp, a radio from the 80s. Every screw he turned down felt like a way to hold something together that was already falling apart. On the 6th morning, Father's Day, the neighborhood looked deceptively peaceful. The Hendersons across the street were setting up a grill. Someone's kids were riding bikes. Thomas sat on the porch, coffee cooling beside him, the newspaper unread in his lap. Margaret was humming softly from the kitchen. For once he wanted to believe it was going to be a normal day. Then the brown delivery truck stopped in front of their house. The driver, a young man in a UPS uniform, smiled. "Morning, sir. You Thomas Reed?" Thomas nodded. "Got something special for you, Sunday delivery. That's extra." He handed over the scanner. "Happy Father's Day." Thomas chuckled awkwardly, signing his name. "Thanks." The box was light, too light for its size. As he carried it inside, he felt a prickle at the back of his neck. Margaret looked up from the sink. "Who's it from?" He turned it around. "No return address." Her expression changed instantly. "That's odd. It's probably Claire," he said, forcing a smile. "Maybe the kids made something." Margaret didn't smile back. Her instincts had always been sharper than his. "Claire hasn't called all week." Thomas set the box on the coffee table. Then maybe this is her way of making peace. But when he leaned closer, the faint smell of cardboard and something earthy, damp, raw filled his nose. Margaret moved in beside him, towel still in her hands. "Tom, don't open it yet." He frowned. "Why not look at the sides?" That was when he saw the holes. Tiny, precise, evenly spaced. Air holes. He looked up at her. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the box shifted slightly. A small sound came from inside. "Screw!" Followed by a soft, unmistakable hiss. Margaret backed away, eyes wide. "It's alive." Thomas's heartbeat roared in his ears. Jesus Christ. The room felt suddenly smaller, the morning sunlight too bright, the air too still. "Call the police," Margaret whispered. "Now." Thomas hesitated for just a moment, staring at the box that sat like a trap on his own coffee table. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed 911. "Emergency line. What's your situation?" There's a package," he stammered. "Delivered this morning. No return address. It's moving. Moving, sir." He swallowed. "It's alive." Thomas stood in his small study, the afternoon light spilling across the old oak desk. Dust floated lazily in the air, dancing in the golden glow. On the shelf above the desk sat a single framed photo: Claire, 8 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a paper crown on her head. Her laughter seemed frozen in time. He reached out and traced the glass with a fingertip. "You used to call me your hero," he whispered. The memory came uninvited. Christmas Eve, 1996. Claire had been obsessed with a dollhouse displayed in the downtown toy store window. It wasn't just any dollhouse, it had tiny electric lights, a front porch, even miniature wallpaper. She talked about it for weeks. Thomas remembered counting the bills from his overtime pay, exhausted after another double shift at the auto shop. His back ached. His hands were raw, but he still wrapped the dollhouse that night with newspaper and tape. When Claire tore the paper open the next morning, her scream of joy filled the whole house. She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking over her hot chocolate. "You're my hero, Dad," she said, her voice small but sincere. He'd never forgotten that moment. But heroes fade, he thought, and sometimes the people you save learn to use your kindness like currency. Years rolled forward in his memory. Claire in college, bright, ambitious, always short on money. Every phone call began with affection and ended with a request. "Dad, it's just a few hundred. My books cost more than I expected. "Dad, the rent's due early this month." Thomas always said yes. Margaret would sigh softly watching him wire money again. "You're not helping her," she'd warned more than once. "You're teaching her not to stand on her own." But he couldn't stand the thought of his daughter struggling. He'd grown up poor watching his own father choose bills over dinner. He'd promised himself his child would never feel that kind of fear. Then came the first betrayal. It was 5 years after her wedding. He'd just paid off their family mortgage when a credit alert arrived, his name linked to a new loan he hadn't taken. At first he thought it was a mistake, but the bank statements told a different story. $4,800 withdrawn from his joint emergency account. Recipient Brian Morgan. Thomas drove to their apartment that same night, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Claire answered the door, pale and nervous. "Dad, it's not what it looks like," she'd said immediately. "Then tell me what it is." "Brian had a bad streak at the tables. He just needed to borrow my money." Thomas finished, his voice breaking. Margaret had been right all along. Claire didn't see it as theft. She saw it as entitlement, an extension of the dollhouse, the college funds, the endless rescues. He didn't report it. He didn't even scold her. He just said, "Don't do this again." But she did, again and again. Each time she cried, he forgave. Each time she promised to change, he believed. And with every rescue, something inside him eroded his authority, his pride, his peace. Standing now in that quiet room, Thomas realized how far gone they were. The little girl who once baked him a crooked birthday cake and called him hero had become a woman who used his love as leverage. He lifted the photo from the shelf and stared into the smiling eyes of a child who no longer existed. "You were my greatest joy," he whispered, his voice thick, "and my greatest mistake." The sound of Margaret moving dishes downstairs drifted through the open door. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, a reminder that soon the world would intrude again. He set the photo back in its place, straightened it carefully, and took a deep breath. Downstairs, a knock echoed from the front door. The officers had arrived, and the box was still waiting on the table. He straightened his shoulders and exhaled slowly. The years had turned love into exhaustion and fatherhood into negotiation. From the hallway below came Margaret's voice, soft, uncertain. "Tom, they're here." He wiped his eyes once, forcing calm into his hands. Whatever waited in that box downstairs, it was no longer about fear. It was about truth. The patrol car lights flickered red and blue against the front windows, flashing across the family photos like warning signals. Thomas opened the door before the second knock. "Mr. Reed," the officer asked, tall, broad-shouldered, calm. His name tag read, D. Cruz. "Yes, come in, please. It's on the table." Margaret hovered behind Thomas, clutching a dish towel like armor. Officer Cruz surveyed the room, his gaze landing on the brown box at the center of the coffee table. "You called about a suspicious delivery?" Thomas nodded. "It's alive." "Alive. There are holes. And we heard something." The officer pulled on latex gloves and crouched beside the table. For a moment, the room went still, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and Margaret's nervous breathing. Then, a faint hiss seeped from the cardboard, a sound so delicate it almost could have been imagined. Cruz tilted the box. "Step back, please." He slit the tape with a utility knife. The top flaps opened, and both Thomas and Margaret flinched backward as something pale and coiled shifted inside. Cruz exhaled slowly. "Not venomous," he said after a glance. "Looks like a corn snake." "A what?" Margaret whispered. "Common pet species, probably 3 feet long. Someone's idea of a joke." He reached in carefully, lifting the snake with practiced ease. The creature's orange and cream scales shimmered under the living room light. Margaret pressed a hand over her mouth. "That's not a joke." Cruz nodded sympathetically. "You'd be surprised. We'll contact animal control." He spoke into his radio, calm, procedural, as if he were calling in a parking violation instead of a nightmare. When the white van arrived 10 minutes later, the animal control specialist transferred the snake into a clear container. "Healthy specimen," he remarked. "Whoever owned it cared enough to poke breathing holes." The phrase landed like a stone. Cared enough. Thomas's throat tightened. "So this wasn't random?" "Maybe not," Cruz said. "People send weird things when they're angry. You have anyone who might want to scare you?" Margaret's eyes darted toward her husband, silently pleading with him not to answer too fast. Thomas hesitated. "We've had family disagreements." The officer's expression softened. Understood. Still, I'd advise filing a report. Pranks like this can escalate. He scribbled notes, left his card, and promised to follow up. When both vehicles finally drove away, the house fell into a silence more unbearable than before. Margaret began wiping the already clean table. God, Tom, who would do such a thing? He stared at the faint ring left by his coffee mug. Someone who knows me. Outside, children rode bicycles, laughter echoing through the street, ordinary sounds that made the Reed's house feel foreign, tainted. Margaret lowered her voice. You think Thomas didn't answer? He didn't need to. Hours later, after dinner sat untouched and the house had gone dim. Thomas entered his study again. He pulled out a folder of bank statements, each page crisp with proof of his generosity. He'd kept meticulous records his whole life. Numbers never lied. He flipped through transactions until one caught his eye. Emerald Reptile Center, $127.50. Date May 28th. Cardholder Thomas Reed. He frowned. He hadn't bought anything from a reptile store. He didn't even like snakes. Margaret appeared at the doorway, her hair loose, her face pale. You're still working? I'm checking something, he said. Do we still have last month's credit bill? She fetched the envelope from a drawer. He unfolded the statement, and there it was again. Same amount, same date. He turned the page over, studying the printed details. Under shipping address was a faint handwritten note, Claire R. Morgan. His stomach dropped. Margaret's breath caught. No, she used my card. Thomas said flatly. She used my card. Margaret took the paper from his hand, scanning the line twice. Maybe it's an error. It's her handwriting. They stood in silence, the weight of realization pressing the air thin. She sent it, Thomas said finally. His voice was quiet, almost reverent, as if saying it too loudly might summon the truth into the room. She actually sent it. Margaret shook her head violently. No, Tom, she wouldn't. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Wouldn't she? She's taken our money, our peace. Why not our safety too? He paced the small study, the paper trembling in his fist. She wanted to frighten us. And it worked. Margaret sank into the chair, tears brimming. What are we going to do? Thomas looked out the window. Across the street porch, lights blinked on in warm sequence. Every other house looked safe. Only theirs carried this secret. We'll handle it, he said finally. But no police reports, not yet. Why not? Because once we make it official, there's no going back, and He swallowed hard. I still remember the little girl who built me birthday cards out of macaroni. Margaret whispered, that girl's gone. Tom. He didn't disagree. Later that night, as Margaret slept fitfully beside him, Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. Each slow rotation felt like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. His mind replayed the day, the hiss, the flash of scales, the officer's calm voice. But above all, he kept seeing the words Emerald Reptile Center burned across the receipt like an accusation. He reached for his phone, scrolling through old messages from Claire, photos of Lily and Ethan, birthday emojis, hearts. The last message 6 days ago. You'll regret this, Dad. He set the phone face down on the nightstand. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the window. Seattle rain, steady cleansing, but tonight it felt like judgment. He whispered into the dark. What kind of daughter sends her father a snake? No answer came, only the steady hiss of water sliding down the glass. Sleep refused to come. The rain had thinned to a mist whispering against the windows, like a secret Thomas couldn't quite hear. He slipped from bed, careful not to wake Margaret, and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of wet cedar and asphalt, clean but heavy. He lit the small lamp by the door. Its yellow halo reached only a few feet into the night before dissolving into fog. Across the street, the Hendersons' porch light flickered, then went dark. The neighborhood was asleep, everyone but him. He leaned on the railing, rubbing the ache in his knuckles. 43 years of work had built these hands, and now they shook not from age but from something colder. Fear. The word felt foreign in his mouth. He'd faced layoffs, storms, hospital bills, but he'd never been afraid of his own blood. Behind him, the door creaked. Tom, Margaret's voice, soft, uncertain. She wore his old cardigan, the sleeves hanging past her wrists. Couldn't sleep, he said. She joined him, arms folded against the chill. Neither could I. For a while they just listened to the rain, to the sigh of trees, to the distance between them. "She's not well," Margaret whispered finally. "Something's broken inside her. Maybe it's our fault." Thomas stared into the streetlight's reflection pooling in the puddles. Fault, maybe. But she made choices too. We all do. Margaret hesitated. "Do you remember sophomore year, that science project she did, the one with the reptiles?" He looked at her, startled. "The terrarium. She raised a baby corn snake," Margaret said quietly. "Kept it under her bed for weeks until you found out." Thomas's breath caught. He hadn't thought about that in decades. The smell of wood chips, the clear plastic box, the way Claire had smiled when the tiny creature coiled around her fingers. "She said snakes were misunderstood," he murmured. Margaret nodded. "Maybe she still believes that." A car passed at the end of the street, its headlights flashing through the mist like brief lightning. For a moment, Thomas saw his own reflection in the window line, tired, a man haunted by the echo of his daughter's laughter. "She's watching us," he said softly. "Not from the window. From wherever she is, waiting to see if she got through." Margaret touched his hand. Then, "Don't let her win." He turned his wedding ring once around his finger, the metal cool against his skin. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll make the call." And in the dim glow of the porch light, the promise felt heavier than any storm. The next morning dawned gray, a thin fog curling over the roofs of Willowbrook Street. The world looked clean again, washed of its sins. But Thomas didn't feel clean. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. Margaret poured coffee without speaking. The silence between them had settled into something heavy and final. "You said you'd make the call," she whispered. He nodded. "It's time." He scrolled to his daughter's name, thumb hovering above the screen. The photo beside her contact showed her smiling at Lily's birthday party 2 years ago, frosting on her nose, innocence caught mid-laugh. It hurt to look at. He pressed call. The dial tone rang once, twice, then her voice. "Dad, bright, cheerful, too bright. Happy Father's Day." "How are you?" Thomas froze. That voice had always been her weapon, warm enough to disarm, sweet enough to manipulate. "I've had an interesting morning," he said. "Oh, what happened?" "Something came in the mail." A pause, just long enough to mean something. "Mail." "What kind of in a box?" he interrupted. "No return address? Special delivery?" Sounded alive. The line went quiet. He heard faint movement, then another voice in the background, male smug laughing. Brian, Thomas said softly. Claire's tone tightened. "Dad, what are you talking about, the box?" "Claire, I don't know what—" The laugh came again, clearer this time. A man's chuckle, low and cruel. Thomas felt the room tilt. "You think this is funny, Dad? You're overreacting," Claire snapped. "It was a prank. Just a stupid prank," Brian thought. Brian thought what? That you needed to lighten up. He clenched the phone so hard his knuckles whitened. "A live snake. You call that light?" She sighed theatrically. "Oh my God, it wasn't even dangerous." He almost laughed. "You're right. It wasn't dangerous. It was pathetic." "Don't talk to me like that," she shot back. "You've been treating me like a child for years. Maybe now you know how it feels to be scared for once." Margaret stepped into the doorway, frozen, listening. "Claire," Thomas said, voice steady, low. "If fear was what you wanted, congratulations. You succeeded." For a heartbeat, he thought he heard her falter, but then Brian muttered something in the background, and her tone hardened again. "You've always been dramatic, Dad. You'll get over it." He smiled bitterly. "Maybe I will, but you won't." He ended the call before she could answer. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Margaret whispered, "She admitted it." "She did," he said. "And now she's going to learn something new. If your own child betrayed you, would you forgive them or teach them what consequence means? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life family stories." Thomas spent the afternoon in his office, the blinds drawn halfway to block the weak Seattle sun. The air smelled faintly of paper and regret. He turned on his computer and logged into the bank portal. His fingers didn't shake this time. He moved through the pages with mechanical calm. First the credit cards. Claire's name sat under authorized users. He clicked remove. The system asked for confirmation. He hovered a second, remembering every transfer, every late-night phone call, every just this once, Dad. Then he pressed confirm. Next came the automatic transfers, monthly payments to her account labeled family support. $1, $200 on the first of each month. He canceled the recurring schedule, typed in new security pins, and re-entered his login credentials. When he reached the end, the screen showed a summary. All changes successful. Access revoked. Margaret appeared at the doorway again. You're really doing it? Yes, she's going to lose her mind. She already did, he said quietly. I'm just catching up. Margaret came closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. Tom, maybe wait, give it a few days. She'll calm down. He shook his head. No, she won't. You don't calm a storm by waiting for it to stop raining. You build a roof. He logged into the insurance portal next. His daughter's name appeared again, co-beneficiary added 5 years ago. With 3 clicks, he reassigned the primary beneficiary to Margaret and the grandchildren. The system asked, Are you sure? He smiled sadly. Never been sure. Outside, the rain had returned, light, persistent, relentless. He worked through each account methodically, health pension savings. Every document closed one more door between father and daughter. By the time he finished, dusk had seeped into the edges of the blinds. He leaned back, staring at the confirmation screen. She'll call soon, he said aloud. Margaret exhaled. And what will you say? He looked at her, the faintest trace of peace settling in his eyes. Nothing she wants to hear. The phone rang at 8:15 p.m. Claire. Thomas let it buzz twice before answering. Dad. Her voice was sharp, panicked. What the hell did you do? My card's not working and the rent payment bounced? Did you cancel everything? He took a sip of his cold coffee. I did. You can't just, what is wrong with you? I have kids, we have bills, you also have jobs you've never used, he said calmly. Maybe it's time. You're insane. You're punishing me for a joke. That was no joke, Claire. You mailed me a live animal. You could have killed someone. Oh my God, it was harmless. You're acting like I sent a bomb. You sent a message, he corrected. And I got it. Dad, please. Her tone cracked, shifting from anger to desperation. I didn't mean to scare you. It was Brian's idea. I didn't even know it was real. He cut her off. Stop lying. You wrote your own name on the shipping label. Silence. Finally, she whispered, You went through my business. You had no right. I had every right. Thomas said, It's my money. It's my name on those accounts. And now it's my boundary. You can't just cut me off without warning. He paused, then said softly, That's what you did when you mailed that box. Her breath hitched. You'll regret this. You think you're teaching me a lesson, but you're destroying this family. He smiled faintly. No, Claire. I'm saving what's left of it. She screamed something incoherent before the line went dead. Thomas placed the phone on the desk, the weight of it no heavier than a hammer after the last nail. Margaret stood quietly behind him. What did she say? That it's my fault? Margaret nodded, tears forming. They always say that. He turned off the lamp, leaving the room in half shadow. Then maybe it's time I stop apologizing for surviving my own family. She reached for his hand, and together they stood in the dim light, the silence of consequence settling over the house like evening rain. Thomas looked down at the dark phone screen one last time and whispered, Happy Father's Day, sweetheart. The line went dead, but the silence didn't. It lingered in the air like smoke after a long burned fire. Margaret stood still, her hand resting on Thomas's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, an old metronome marking the rhythm of their new life, one without begging, without threats, without fear. He sank back into the chair, eyes on the phone. Its screen reflected the faint shimmer of the rain outside. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the next call. There would be no next call. Margaret whispered, Does it feel better? He nodded slowly. Not better, just real. She exhaled, wiping her cheek. You did what you had to do. I did what she forced me to, he said quietly. I just never thought love could end in a transaction. Margaret sat beside him, and together they listened to the rain, to the faint creak of the house, to the heartbeat of something broken but still alive. The phone buzzed once more, but this time it wasn't a call. A bank notification blinked. Transfer canceled successfully. Thomas smiled faintly. She'll know soon enough. He reached out, turned off the desk lamp, and the room dissolved into darkness except for the rain-lit window. Outside, the storm eased into a drizzle. Inside, the ticking clock continued steady, patient-free. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, leaving behind a heavy stillness that clung to the house like a second skin. Thomas sat in the living room, the only light coming from the lamp near the window. The clock ticked steadily, an ordinary sound that now felt strangely loud. He stared at the phone resting on the table. It was quiet, lifeless, harmless. For years, that small device had been the leash around his neck, vibrating with every demand, every apology, every false emergency. Now it was still. Peace, he thought. Or maybe just silence where love used to be. Margaret had gone to bed hours ago, exhausted by grief. He hadn't followed. His mind wouldn't settle. Every memory seemed to surface at once: their daughter's first cry, her graduation the day she moved out, and every phone call that followed. Each one, he realized now, had been a withdrawal from his heart. He picked up an old photo album from the shelf. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and dust. There she was, Claire at 5, riding her red bicycle in the driveway. He remembered the moment perfectly, her wobbling down the path, the training wheels just removed. She had fallen, scraped her knee, and burst into tears. Thomas had run to her, kneeling in the gravel. "You're okay, sweetheart. Try again." She'd sniffled and nodded, gripping the handlebars tighter. Within minutes, she was pedaling on her own, laughing through her tears. That was what being a father meant back then, catching her before she hit the ground, steadying her until she could balance. Somewhere along the line, he'd forgotten to let go. He'd mistaken rescue for love. He'd mistaken dependence for closeness. Now, staring at the photos, he understood. Every time he'd saved her, he'd stolen a lesson she needed to learn. And every time he gave more, she respected him less. He shut the album and leaned back, feeling the ache of years settling into his bones. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked Margaret. She appeared a moment later, wrapped in her robe, her hair loose and silver in the dim light. "You're still awake?" He smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. My head won't quiet down." She joined him on the couch, their knees brushing. Neither spoke for a while. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with things they'd both been afraid to say. Finally, Margaret whispered, "You remember our wedding night?" He chuckled softly. "You mean when the motel roof leaked?" She said, laughing through her tears. "You promised me that night. You said, 'Don't worry, Maggie, I'll always fix things.'" Thomas's smile faded. "I remember." She reached for his hand. "Maybe this time fixing means letting it break." The words landed in him like a deep breath after years of drowning. He turned to her, studying her face, the lines etched from decades of patience, the sadness behind her eyes. "You think I did the right thing?" "I think," she said carefully, "you finally stopped confusing love with surrender." Thomas looked down, the tears coming before he could stop them. "I didn't want to lose her." Margaret squeezed his hand. "You didn't lose her. You just stopped financing her war." They sat together, listening to the wind press softly against the windows. For the first time in months, there were no raised voices, no tension between phone calls, no countdown to the next crisis. When she finally stood to go back upstairs, she bent down and kissed his head. "Come to bed soon, Tom." "I will," he whispered, though he wasn't sure he would. The house fell quiet again. Thomas turned off the lamp and stepped outside. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of soil and rain. The backyard glistened faintly under the half-moon. His eyes fell on the old cherry tree by the fence, the one he and Claire had planted when she was 10. It had grown crooked over the years, half its branches bare, half still green. The trunk split where a storm had struck it years ago, leaving a long scar of gray wood. He walked over and touched the bark. Beneath the rough surface, he felt the pulse of life faint, but there. "You'll grow again, won't you?" he murmured. A breeze stirred the branches, shaking a few drops of rain onto his shoulders. He smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." He stayed there for a long time, watching the moonlight filter through the remaining leaves. The air felt lighter now, the night no longer something to endure, but something to rest inside. When he finally returned to the house, he paused at the doorway. The family portrait still hung crooked above the fireplace. He straightened it, careful not to look too long at the smiling faces frozen in better years. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down again, and whispered into the quiet room, "I still love her." but from a distance. The words didn't hurt as much as he expected. They felt like a truth he'd been circling for decades. He lifted the glass in a silent toast to the storm outside, to the peace that followed, and to the father he was finally learning how to be. Would you still love someone who tried to hurt you? Let us know in the comments, and if this story touched you, subscribe for more true stories of love loss and redemption. He stayed seated for a long while, the glass of water half finished beside him. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was just quiet. On the table lay a notepad, the one he used for grocery lists. He pulled it closer and began to write. Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not angry anymore. Anger is loud and I'm tired of loud things. You hurt us, but you also reminded me what love costs when it's unconditional. Maybe one day you'll understand that what I did tonight wasn't revenge, it was mercy for both of us. Your mother still said it's a place for you at the table sometimes. Maybe she always will. I hope you find peace, the kind that doesn't need someone else's pain to exist. He stopped writing, realizing there was nothing else left to say. The words looked strange on the page, like a conversation happening years too late. He folded the note once and placed it inside the album he'd looked through earlier, between the photo of her first bicycle and the one of her graduation. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the wet grass. It painted the room in pale gold, quiet and clean. For the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt free. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of Seattle morning where the air smelled like wet metal and unfinished dreams. Thomas was already awake before the alarm, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. Margaret came downstairs, rubbing her eyes. You didn't sleep again. He shook his head. Didn't need to. The dawn light made his face look older but steadier. There were no tremors in his hands when he reached for the folder lying open beside the mug. A folder filled with bank statements, insurance papers, and the will he'd written years ago when love still meant safety. I'm going to see Elaine today, he said quietly. Margaret paused halfway to the counter. Our lawyer, yeah. It's time to put things in writing. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Do what you need to Tom. He kissed her forehead before leaving, something he hadn't done in months. The city was half awake when he arrived downtown. The rain had started again, light persistent drumming against the windshield like polite applause. Elaine Porter's office sat on the third floor of a granite building, its windows glowing with the steady warmth of people who spent their lives putting chaos into order. The receptionist greeted him with a gentle smile. Mr. Reed, Ms. Porter will see you now. Elaine stood when he entered, her presence calm and grounded. She was in her 50s, sharp eyes softened by kindness. Thomas, it's been a long time. Too long, he said, taking a seat. She noticed the folder in his hands and the exhaustion in his eyes. You said on the phone it was urgent. He nodded. It is. He opened the folder, spreading the papers across her desk like evidence. This is what's left of my family. She read in silence as he spoke about the inheritance fights, the snake, the threats, the guilt that had aged him faster than time. He told her everything, his voice steady until he reached the part about the box. Then it cracked just once, before regaining strength. When he finished, Elaine leaned back, exhaling slowly. Thomas, what you're describing isn't conflict. It's coercion. He looked up. Coercion, yes. It's manipulation with intent to control. It doesn't matter that she's your daughter, it's still abuse. The word hung between them, heavier than any legal document. Thomas blinked hard. I just thought she was lost. Elaine folded her hands. Lost. People don't send snakes, Thomas. They ask for directions. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. So what now? Now, she said, sliding a legal pad toward her, we fix it. She outlined the plan in clean, methodical strokes. First, your will. We'll remove Claire and establish an educational trust for Lily and Ethan. That ensures the children are protected, but their parents have no access. Thomas nodded slowly. Second, a restraining order. Based on the threats in the package, the court will approve it within 48 hours. It won't stop her anger, but it'll give you legal distance. He hesitated. That feels extreme. So is the box, Elaine replied gently. He said nothing. Lastly, she continued, we'll update your power of attorney and financial designations. Margaret will hold sole authority. No shared access, no vulnerabilities. For a moment, he stared at her like she was offering oxygen after years underwater. You make it sound so simple. It isn't, Elaine said softly. It's just necessary. He knotted his throat tight. Let's do it. She printed the documents while he sat in silence, the sound of the rain on the office window syncing with the quiet rhythm of his heart. When she returned, she placed a pen beside the papers. Take your time. Thomas picked it up and stared at the first page. The ink shimmered faintly under the desk lamp. He read every line twice, making sure he understood what each stroke of his signature would mean. He signed anyway. Page after page, his name carved itself into permanence. When he finished, Elaine gathered the documents carefully. You've just changed your future, Thomas. He exhaled. I think the future was already changing. I just decided to participate. Her expression softened. You're not cutting her out of love. You're cutting her out of danger. He smiled weakly. That's what fathers are supposed to do, protect even from their own. Elaine paused, studying him. Do you want me to inform her formally? No, he said. Let her find out on her own. She'll understand faster that way. Elaine nodded, sliding the signed will into a leather case. I'll handle the filings today. By next week, everything will be official. Thank you. She stood, offering her hand. For what it's worth, Thomas, you're not the first parent I've seen make this choice. But you're one of the few who did it before it was too late. He shook her hand. I guess that makes me lucky. Outside, the rain had eased into a drizzle. Thomas walked slowly along the wet sidewalk, the city humming around him, cars, footsteps, distant laughter. For once, the noise didn't feel intrusive. It felt alive. He stopped by a storefront window and caught his reflection in the glass. An old man in a raincoat, eyes lined with loss, but posture straight as a rule. For the first time in years, he looked like someone he recognized. He whispered to the reflection, "The world didn't change. I did." A bus rumbled past, splashing his shoes with cold water. He didn't flinch. He just smiled and kept walking. He didn't open his umbrella. The rain touched his face gently, no longer a punishment, just proof he could still feel. 2 days later, the house on Willowbrook Street was quieter than it had been in years. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp, almost new. Margaret sat by the kitchen window, pouring tea into 2 chipped mugs. Thomas joined her, his steps steady, his shoulders no longer bent under invisible weight. Feels quiet, doesn't it? He said. Margaret smiled softly. It feels earned. They drank in silence, listening to the slow drip from the gutters outside. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started the sound, ordinary, comforting. The phone buzzed on the counter. Thomas reached for it. Elaine Porter, he said, answering. Thomas, good morning. I just wanted you to know the documents were delivered this morning. Both Claire and Brian have been officially served. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing out through his nose. Thank you, Elaine. There was a pause on the line. She didn't take it well, Elaine added carefully. She said, quote, "He'll regret this." Thomas's voice stayed calm. She said that before. I'll keep a record of the statement, Elaine said. You did the right thing. After she hung up, Margaret stood quietly behind him. She's angry. He nodded. Anger's easier than guilt. They stood by the window side by side, watching sunlight thread through the wet branches of the cherry tree. Half bare, half alive, it looked stubborn enough to survive anything. For the first time, Thomas believed he could too. That afternoon, while Margaret folded laundry, Thomas glanced out the front window. A black sedan sat idling across the street, engine running, 2 silhouettes inside. His pulse quickened. Maggie, he called softly. She came to the window. Do you know them? He shook his head. The car lingered for another few seconds before pulling away, tires hissing against wet pavement. Margaret exhaled. Maybe just lost. Maybe, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He drew the curtains closed and turned off the light. The house dimmed again, peaceful but watchful. Narration, final voiceover. Maybe she'll never forgive me. Maybe she'll never understand. But someday when silence grows too loud, she'll hear it too. Voices fade, but guilt echoes louder. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes family can heal. Your support helps us bring more true stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. Thank you for watching.